Welcome to No Disputing That, the go-to podcast for all things mediation, arbitration, and alternative dispute resolution. I'm your host, Gregory Hunt, here to bring you expert insights and engaging conversations with leading professionals shaping the future of ADR. Whether you're navigating the field or just curious, this podcast will sharpen your understanding and challenge your perspective. Let's delve into the strategies, stories, and solutions that make the world of dispute resolution so dynamic. Ready? Let's get started. Welcome back to the show, everybody. And today I'm pleased to have as a guest Len Bunton. I've known Len for many years, probably longer than we both realise, back in my days in the CIARB. So probably since about 1995 or something like that, I would have first come across Len. And Len, good to have you here.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. As I say, we've known each other a long time, and it's good to catch up. Do you want me to start with a little bit of background on my career?
Yeah, please, that'd be good. Yeah.
Well, I kind of liken my career to a game of football in the sense that the first half was about 30 years as a QS project management consultant, built up a big practice. And then half time came when my wife said to me one day, after staggering in on a Friday night, after being in 5 different cities in the UK in a week, you're getting too old for this. Why don't you just hang up your boots and get into dispute resolution, which really was my first love, if I can put it that way, because from the stages of my career, I was involved in negotiating issues between parties and getting them to resolve it. So the second half has been acting as a construction adjudicator, over 450 appointments, I think, and a party advisor. And that's been extremely interesting as well, working with a lot of people in the industry. I've always been a great believer, Greg, in face-to-face of talking about issues and trying to get them resolved. And we'll maybe come on to some of the difficulties in the industry at the moment. So we're now at the stage of extra time, and I'm hoping the whistle doesn't blow too soon on that one, because I'm back with a huge commitment to developing the conflict avoidance process in the construction industry, which has been fascinating, and we no doubt we can develop that discussion.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you've got like a massive penalty shootout to come as well, which will add more time.
Yeah. So as long as I'm not carried off in the dreaded stretcher, that's what I'm trying to avoid. Yeah. It goes without saying, for those of your listeners and yourself, the problems in the UK construction industry at the moment are extreme. We saw a fortnight ago the demise of ISG, and what devastation that will leave behind will emerge in due course. But the industry is going through a strange period of people saying we must get far more collaboration, we must work closely together. And the one thing I've realized after all this time in the industry is the number of organizations that are all sending out the same message, but there doesn't seem to be a degree of collaboration between the collaborators, if I can put it that way.
That's something that's happened for a long time. When I was working in various ADR bodies, it was quite similar. There was always a public view that everyone was going to collaborate, but actually not as much collaboration went on behind the scenes as would have been good.
So, when people say to me, we must have more collaboration, I usually say, well, what do you want us to do that we're not actually doing at the present moment? And the construction industry, I think, has got some fairly fundamental issues to get resolved. And as to whether or not that will be resolved and become a better place, as far as the Bunton jury is concerned, that is out at the moment. I just cannot see the change coming that is absolutely needed to make it a much more effective industry. Interesting. Sorry, just to make this final point, I spoke at the Conflict Avoidance Conference last week in London, and we put up a slide that showed the number of organisations in the UK that live off the construction industry, if I can put it that way, the number of people that are employed and the number of organisations and the turnover, and it's about £320 billion that the industry makes to the economy. So it's a vast network of people.
Yeah.
And getting them all pointing in the right direction is massive.
Well, it's a massive challenge and something
Massive
that
challenge. Yep.
a lot of support is needed for as well, and maybe some more external support rather than just leaving it to the sort of bodies like your own and ADR bodies to try and sort out.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm a great believer that the only people that can change the industry is the industry itself.
Mm.
And I think there are far too many people saying, what's the government going to do about it? And I challenge people every day of my life saying, what are you going to do about it? You know, you're running a major subcontracting business.
Mm.
What are you going to do to make change?
So for listeners who aren't as au fait with the sector as you are, what do you see as the main challenges facing the construction industry at the moment?
Um, probably the key issue is payment and cash flow, and every dispute that arises in the industry will have at the end of it a financial impact.
Mm.
And there is no doubt about it that the supply chain is suffering because of payment and cash flow issues, and also has. And I kind of liken this, Greg, to doing a jigsaw. You've got 70 or 80 different things that I think are needing to be sorted before the whole thing fits together. So,
Yeah.
just to be clear, I don't think there is one single change that will have a huge impact on the industry. I think it's a whole series of things, and it's right down to the old chestnut of the industry is price driven. Many clients will only go for the contractor that puts in the lowest bid, and all they're doing is buying trouble later on.
This episode is sponsored by Business AI Studio. Are you looking for a smarter way to create professional video content? With Business AI Studio, you can generate engaging, high-quality videos using AI avatars, perfect for boosting your business presence, simplifying legal concepts, onboarding staff, or delivering training on demand. It's fast, cost-effective, and scalable for businesses of all sizes. Visit ai-avatars.io to learn more.
Another major problem is amending standard contracts, and we have a campaign running to say, no, we're not signing up to that provision. Go and find somebody else. And to be honest with you, through one of the sectors I'm involved in, they provide a contract review service, and we are continually highlighting high-risk clauses. And going back to the client and say, I'm afraid we can't enter into the subcontract with you because the conditions are far too onerous. And incredibly, a lot of them are coming back and saying, okay, we'll take them out. And you say, well, why did you have them in the first place?
So are they in the first place from the main contractor, or are they just sort of legacy clauses that people aren't thinking of taking out?
They're in the main contract, and then the main contractor just sends them down the line to the supply chain, or the main contractor puts in onerous clauses himself. And I'm talking about ludicrous things, Greg. That's something I looked at last week. A client had a subcontract for £350,000, and the liquidate damages were £55,000 a week. And we just said, thanks, but no thanks. Sent the tender documents back, never heard from them again. So you have to question, I hate to point the finger at lawyers, but why do lawyers want to put high-risk amendments into contracts? It's completely negative, counterproductive, and it is not needed. So that is a battleground. If I was to identify a big battleground for this campaign, that is probably up at the top of the tree.
And presumably lawyers have been asked that question.
Yes, they have, and I never get a satisfactory answer. The answer you usually get is, well, the client wants us to put this in, and there's no concerns as to the risk. I mean, what people don't seem to realize is when you put a risk clause in, the contractors get three options. He either gets rid of it, or he walks away, or it gets modified. These are the three things, and it's the modification, I think, is where progress can be made, because I don't think you'll change the mindset of a number of big clients and their legal advisors, but you can do a lot to improve the present situation.
Yeah. I think that leads on nicely then to the conflict avoidance process. Do you want to give us a bit of background to what that is, how it started, and where you are now with it?
Yeah, sure. Well, this has been for me, uh, coming towards the end of my career, it's been a phenomenal journey. I'm now chair of the Conflict Avoidance Coalition. We've got 72 public and private sector organisations involved, and it's growing all the time. This morning, before I come on this call, I wrote to half a dozen people and invited them to join the coalition. So the process is about early intervention when an issue arises on a project. Instead of getting into the email warfare campaign, the contractor and the design team and the client often and the subcontractors try to find a resolution to it. And if they can't do that themselves, either with the people on site or bringing in senior management, it escalates to a third party coming in. It's called a CAP professional. And they come in and work with the parties to try to get a resolution. And the track record has been established, Greg, with Transport for London, who a few years ago had about 19 or 20 different projects where they could see that there were issues developing. So they entered into discussions with the RICS, who set up a number of people who were brought in. And interestingly enough, the contractor and the client, TfL, both identified people that they wanted to have to deal with this. You weren't imposing anybody. You weren't just selecting somebody off a panel. So that's been the track record. In the last 4 years, our work has been creating awareness of the conflict avoidance process.
So sorry, just going back a step, though, that TfL case, what sort of people were getting brought in under the procedure? Were they qualified arbitrators who could also mediate, or were they lawyers, or who were the typical sort of person who would be brought in?
It was a mixture. It was probably all of them. There were some legal issues. There were some issues over interpretation of contracts and/or agreements. Some of it was design issues, where you might need an architect or an engineer. And some of it was just simply, well, not simply, it was complicated, but there was a problem with where design responsibility lay. That was a case of working through that and establishing a resolution.
What would the outcomes be? Would it be an arbitration award or an adjudicated
No,
decision?
the CAP makes a series of non-binding recommendations that go to the parties. And if one of them disagrees with the conclusions or the recommendations, then they're perfectly entitled to say why they disagree. But the facts are that barring one that went to a further tribunal, all 19 of these were reduced. And I've had several myself where I've worked with the parties, and it's to do with issues that inevitably mean somebody's not getting paid or somebody needs to be paid. And you find a compromise. I mean, there was one case where my recommendation was that a subcontractor was paid some money, and the subcontractor and the main contractor worked together to find some savings on the project that compensated for the additional cost on the matter that they were disputing. So you get the important thing to me, Greg, is you get finality. You allow people to go on with building the project, which is what we're all trained and contracted to do. So we had the Conflict Avoidance Conference in London last week. We were limited to 150 delegates because it was in a public building, but the reaction from that has been absolutely phenomenal. People saying this is the way forward for the industry. So my task, and with others, is to convert the enthusiasm into reality. I think this will be a success because it needs to be client driven. It's also very important to bear in mind that it's a top-down, bottom-up process. It's only effective if the construction supply chain experience the benefit of early intervention. Because at the moment they are the ones that are taking the brunt of the likes of ISG's failures, etc., etc.
So you mentioned you've got around 70 members of the Conflict Avoidance Coalition.
Yeah.
Are they different construction bodies, or do they include professional bodies and institutions?
Yeah, they include all the players: RICS, IB, ICE, CIR. We've got a number of tier one contractors. We've got a number of subcontractors from the finishes sector. We're now widening the scope, so we've got people from the nuclear, water, energy, power, wind farms. Anybody that strikes a blow in a construction project, is more than welcome to join this. And it's not unwieldy. We meet once a month for a maximum of an hour. But what we do continually is to feed out to the coalition where we're making progress, who we're talking to. It's not a scattergun approach. It's well controlled. And the RICS, I have to say, have done an absolutely fantastic job in supporting this. And I'm working with them, and I say to them, look, I've got an idea here, and their attitude is, get on with it, Len. If you think it'll work. And I'm doing the same with other people in the coalition. Somebody emailed me this morning and said, I think I'd like to talk to local government. I said, well, get on with it.
Yeah.
Come back in a couple of weeks and tell me what progress you've made. So I'm an absolute convert to this process. And I mean, one of the things I mentioned, progress in the conflict avoidance process, and scope for mediators. Because I think people will need perhaps some training in how to negotiate, how to deal with different attitudes, different temperaments, different interests, how to steer your way through that.
Yeah. In terms of the coalition, then what and the process itself, the whole package, what's the sort of ultimate end game? You've extra time's come to a close. You're about to take the final penalty and say, right, that's enough from me. What do you want to have achieved at that time?
What I want to achieve is an industry that recognizes that there is a better way than going to adjudication or arbitration. In my view, the jury is out on adjudication at the present moment. Even if you have a decision that's in your favor, quite often you don't get paid. So driving change in the industry and saying, right, we have a problem, let's get together and try and get it resolved. But there is, in my experience, Greg, there's always a solution to be found. It's maybe not ideal, maybe not suits everybody, but you get it resolved and put to bed. And I think fundamentally, the one thing I haven't touched on about the state of the industry at the moment are the mental health issues. I read yesterday, I think, need to get my numbers right, but there's over 500 people committed suicide in the industry last year. Now, how much of that is down to payment and cash flow issues, I don't know. But all I do know is that I deal 3 or 4 times a week with people that are suffering severe stress because their business is toiling because of the conduct of others. I always remember speaking to a client, and he said, when I go home at 5 o'clock on a Friday night and my kids need to be taken to swimming or football or whatever over the weekend, and the family are starting to talk about the family holiday. And I've got somebody that owes me a considerable amount of money, and my brain doesn't switch off till 9 o'clock on Monday morning. It's with me all the time, worrying about this. And I think this is a factor that the industry is ignoring at the moment, the impact on people's health and the strain. And they need somebody, like myself and others, to put an arm around them and say, look, we're going to get you through this one way or the other. I
I think
spoke to...
I think what you've said there, even it just I was thinking in sort of in the background, well, isn't this something that could be used in other industries as well? And then when you said about mental health and particularly about payment and cash flow, it's as a mediator, it's something I hear time and time and time again. And that story you just gave then of, your mind can switch off at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. I think that's the same for most business owners, regardless of what sector they're in. You'd be worrying about something all weekend and actually almost wishing it was Monday morning so you could deal with it.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. There's absolutely no reason why this process can't be used in other sectors. I noticed that the RICS has now set up a conflict avoidance process for the agricultural industry, where they seem to... I didn't know anything about that. You've maybe come across that. They have disputes and problems. So yeah, any other sector could and should use this.
Yeah. And I've known a few people in agriculture, and going back to mental health again, that's a major issue in that particular environment. I
Yeah,
think anything that avoids conflict is going to be something which is going to you're going to have people like yourself on one side, but you're always going to be fighting against the fact that when there is conflict, that's a whole industry in itself. And it's certainly not in some interests to avoid conflict, because conflict's what pays the wages at the end of the day. So it's a real tough one. And
yeah.
I
I
think that
mean,
it's
who...
sometimes it's not just about avoiding the conflict. It's about the fact, well, there's going to be conflict, so how are we going to deal with it and deal with it
Yeah,
properly?
yeah, you're absolutely right. We need to face up to the realities. Do you know when Sir Michael Latham, if you recall, his report came out in, I think it was 1994, he recommended adjudication as a means of dealing with payment disputes, and he was right. But who could have believed that 26 years further on, we've had another amendment to the legislation. We've had over 650 cases that have gone through the courts in Scotland, England, and Ireland. And we have an army of lawyers specialising in adjudication disputes.
Mm,
And that is money that is being hemorrhaged out of the construction industry.
yeah.
And
You know what,
that...
Len? When I started Hunt ADR about 8 years ago, I was one of the things that we offered was adjudication. We became an adjudicator nominating body, and we had quite a lot of interest. And I put a panel together, and we had some sort of rules and things. And then to me, it just didn't feel right, because what we had was there would be cases where it was something which could have gone to mediation. And if it had gone to mediation, the cost of the potential resolution, because obviously mediation doesn't always settle, would have, say, been £3,000 to £4,000. The same dispute, if it went through adjudication, was costing tens of thousands of pounds.
Yeah.
And it to me, I felt uncomfortable as an AMB charging those sort of figures, when actually, in my own mind, if they'd have been mediated, most of them would have been resolved.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about is the amount of mediation that goes on in the construction industry now. In my experience, Greg, it's been very, very limited.
Mm.
I don't know why that is.
I
I
think
mean,
it's
I
probably because of adjudication,
think
and the
so.
natural first thought is let's make a referral to adjudication. Um, as a sector, I mean, when I used to work at the CIR, when we first met, now that organization was born from construction arbitrators. Now, construction is an industry which lends itself perfectly to ADR, but mediation's never really got the numbers that arbitration and adjudication have got.
It just surprises me that people are not turning more to mediation. Interestingly enough, somebody said to me the other day when I was explaining the conflict avoidance process, they said, "Len, this is just simply mediation." Well, I don't think it is, because I think, and you can pull me up if you think I'm not right on this point. I think that the differential factor in my mind is that the CAP professional is an experienced construction industry person. They know the industry. They know things that happen about things that happen in projects. So they understand the same language of the people that they're dealing with.
Yeah,
That,
quite often you will get that from if a claim does go to mediation, the parties will quite often say, "Can we have someone who's from the industry?"
uh-huh.
Because they want someone who speaks the language and understands what they're talking about. Um, but of course, the mediator isn't a decision maker,
Yeah.
so it's less relevant. And I know from what you've said that the the CAP person, isn't necessarily a decision maker because they're making a recommendation. But it's still a recommendation, isn't it? It's still potentially is the solution, where a mediator is working with the parties for them to come up with their own solution to it.
Yeah. I wonder if I can ask you a burning question.
Mhm.
It happened to me a number of years ago in a mediation when one of the parties said to me, "If you were the adjudicator here,
Mm,
who would you consider is correct in this argument?"
mm.
It's so long ago, I can't remember what my answer was, to be perfectly honest. But I just wonder if a mediator should venture that type of opinion if asked. What do you think of that?
Well, I think there's two answers to that. The sort of one answer is this isn't supposed to happen, but we all know it does. Sometimes mediators are selected because the parties want some sort of opinion off them.
Uh-huh.
So when we train mediators under Civil Mediation Council accreditation, we can only train facilitative mediation. So the mediator isn't going to make a resolution. It's up to the parties to find the resolution. Mediator works them to help them get there. But the reality is quite often that once parties actually appoint mediators, they want to appoint someone who is going to give them an opinion. So it's not taught, but that's something that we hear time and time again, that that's what parties quite often want when they appoint a mediator, particularly if it's a very legalistic dispute and they've appointed a KC mediator or a former judge as a mediator. They want to know what that person thinks about the case. But that's not what we teach when we teach mediation. It's about facilitative mediation, and helping the parties to come to their own solution. So I think some mediators in that situation might have given an opinion, um, and others wouldn't have done.
Right.
And who knows what's right or wrong? The technically, I suppose it's wrong to give an opinion because that's technically what a mediator is not supposed to do. But if that's why the parties have appointed that mediator, and everyone knows that the parties have appointed the mediator because they really value that mediator's opinion, then what else can be expected when they're asked the question?
Hmm. I think one of the difficulties with construction disputes is that you've got, maybe all disputes, maybe not just the construction industry, you've got people that are at opposite ends of the spectrum in relation to how they see things,
Mm,
and persuading somebody that you don't think they're correct is an uphill struggle. And
mm,
you've also got this difficulty with the industry, which has never changed. On the one hand, you've got a main contractor who downstream has got a lot of subcontractors on a project, and he's having his battles with them. And then the main contractor is having his battles with the client. I mean, a common phrase you get when you're helping people out is the contractor says, "Well, the quantity surveyor is not valuing this as a variation." He says it's not a variation. So I'm not getting paid, and therefore you can't get paid, although there's pay when paid is outlawed. But
Mm,
that's a reality of what happens in the industry.
mm.
And
Yeah,
what's
I think
yeah,
sometimes whatever the training is, whether it's ADR related or it's sector specific, quite often when people enter into an industry and they've come with some training background, they're not actually given information on what really happens. They're given information on what should happen, and this is how we want you to behave. And actually, then what happens is they get into the workplace and they find that what they've been trained on just isn't how things happen in real life.
yeah. I'm interested in your views on this. One of the things we've been looking at in the coalition is educating or influencing the next generation that's coming through,
Mm,
because a lot of people around the table have been brought up in an atmosphere of confrontation and disagreement.
mm,
Whereas if we started to concentrate on the young folk that are coming through as architects and QSs and engineers and get their mindset in the right place,
mm.
if in the longer term that will benefit the industry, I think it must do.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, definitely.
And I don't think we spend enough time with younger people saying, and some of the stuff I see as an adjudicator would make your blood run cold. Some of
Mm,
the emails that get sent.
mm. Yeah, I think educating the young people is something that, I think as a country we've failed on in terms of the benefits of using different types of ADR, particularly mediation. I lead some training at Ulster University on this, and every year we go in and we teach on the LLM in international commercial law, and it's a postgraduate qualification, obviously. And quite often, a number of the people on the course are already practicing lawyers,
Yeah,
but they're young, and they always finish the course and say, "This has changed the way I'm going to look at everything now. When I go back to the office, my attitude and my viewpoint on how I'm going to deal with things is completely changed." And I always think, well, that's brilliant, but wouldn't it be great to be able to get to these young lawyers before they go into the workplace and actually really sort of give them the real benefits and experience in using the skills that a mediator would use to resolve conflict before it's too late.
yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. So I think if I can get extra time on the extra time, I think concentrating on younger people and
Mm,
explaining the issues to them and saying it's really not smart to send an email out like that. What does it achieve?
mm,
You may think you've given somebody a punch in the nose, but you're going to get one back.
yeah,
What's the point?
yeah. And it's going to be a punchback from someone who's bigger than you are. Yeah.
Well, that's not a problem as far as I'm concerned because I'm only 5'2". Anyway,
Mm.
but your
But
own
it's
business
been,
is hugely impressive. I follow your training courses and everything, and
oh, thanks, Sam.
it's quite amazing what progress that you've made since you started up.
Thank you. Thanks. It's a battle,
Yeah.
but
How 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 do you see the recent changes in the approach of the courts to mediation? We don't have that in Scotland at the
mm.
present moment, but that's very positive, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and we're all waiting to see what comes from it. Funny enough, the episode before this one was on that very subject, the changes to the CPR. Um, I think it's look, there's been many things over the years. I mean, I started in this sector in 1995, so I'm coming up to my 30 years now. So my half time is coming soon, Len. Um, and there's always been so many, oh, this is it. This is the thing that's going to make the change. This is it now. We're over the hill. We're coming out the other side. And it never quite does it. So I am a little bit skeptical um, about what the changes will mean. But they are positive changes. And I think if if mediation doesn't get a kick on from here, then we have to look really, really seriously, and someone needs to sit down with the government and look seriously about what is holding this up. This now you're saying that the judges can compel mediation and other forms of ADR. Why aren't they doing it? What's happening? Why is there still a block there? So it's going to be an interesting few years to see what comes out of the other side of that.
Yeah. Just going back to what I mentioned about early intervention,
Mm.
have you experienced a mediation when an issue or a dispute was beginning to develop between people, or are you usually brought in when it has actually landed?
Both, yeah. So personally, my experience has been brought in when it's actually landed. But I have known sort of anecdotally through other mediators over the last 20 years or so cases where there's been, a contract's being entered into and they know that there are some potentially sticky clauses within it. So they've brought a mediator in to actually mediate on the contract. And that's generally worked very well when I've been told stories about that.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting.
yeah, so my own experience has been very much no, you're brought in when there's already a dispute, and then you try and sit with the parties and help them to solve it. But definitely, I've heard quite a few anecdotally over the years where the mediator's been brought in before the contract has been signed to deal with sticky issues in the contract.
Mhm. That's interesting.
Mm. But probably not as much as there should be.
Yeah. It's been fascinating having
Yeah.
a discussion on this. I feel as though we're sitting in a nice pub somewhere with a glass of wine, just chewing the
Uh,
fat,
wish we
despite the
were.
fact we're hundreds of miles apart.
Yeah. Wish we were, Len, to be honest. Well, we'll have to do that. So next time I'm up in Scotland, or next time you're down here, let me know, and we can get together.
Yeah, no problem at all. And I'll love to keep you and your listeners appraised on the conflict avoidance process. And anybody that wants to sign up, just go Google the RICS Conflict Avoidance Pledge and sign up.
Sounds good.
This is not just about getting a diploma on your wall, it's a commitment. You've got to demonstrate that you're committed to it. That's why the coalition has now introduced bronze, silver, and gold partnerships. So it becomes part and parcel of your everyday business life.
Mm,
And that's hopefully before the ref blows the whistle, Greg,
mm.
we will see it happening.
Yeah, hope so. Fingers crossed. I'll be having a look myself.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks very much, Len.
Not all. Pleasure again. Thanks.
Right. See you soon.
Bye bye.
Thank you for joining me on No Disputing That. If today's discussion sparked your interest, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. For more insights and updates, follow us online or visit our website. Keep learning, keep mediating, and remember, there's no disputing that.